Greetings, everyone. This is the first of a short series of screencasts that I would like you to listen to before you come to class so that when you come, we'll be ready to actually work on the assignment and perhaps even finish it during this week. So we'll give you an overview of the menu to begin with. My hope is that after viewing this first screencast, you'll be able to differentiate menu-related terms such as static, cycle, restaurant style, single use, and some of the other common vocabulary in this chapter. I used the image of our recent open house event as a great example of a single-use menu. Even though we used the same menu last year, that would still fall under the category of a single-use menu because it's only a periodic special event type of menu. You remember from last quarter that the menu fits into the control part of the system, and it is absolutely the most significant and far-reaching control that you'll encounter in any food service system. Before you think about doing anything related to a menu, or at least in the process, you need to think about some of the trends that are going on in the food service industry. And we continue to spend about half of our food dollars on meals away from home. A large percentage of that, of course, is in for-profit restaurants, but a significant amount of that as well is in on-site food service, cafeterias, schools, and so on. And so that's definitely a big player in the food service world. In terms of food preferences and some of the things that menu writers are considering, there's still a love for international foods of all kinds. Meatless has become mainstream. Gluten-free is, of course, as you all know, very popular now, far beyond those who need it for medical reasons. And I would say the local, organic, fair trade, and sustainable movement is growing. It's very strong in California, and it's growing in other parts of the country. The graphic I included illustrates another important trend that is not quite as obvious, but there is a proposed merger between Sysco, the largest food supply distributor in the U.S., with U.S. Foods, the second largest. So together, if this merger is approved, they would hold 27% of the market share and potentially more if they grow. And there is some antitrust review of this going on because of the size of the organization that this would be, but this also could have a definite impact on purchasers and food service operators. The menu is simply a list of food items that are available for the customer or the patient, and it's beyond just that list of food. It's an important way to market your product. It's obvious in restaurants, but it's also important in healthcare environments. And particularly printed menus in healthcare settings are often used as a way to promote nutrition information as well. This screenshot is from a menu at a Sodexo account, a large health system of over 1,000 beds that uses a restaurant-style menu. And I intentionally left the print small so that you can see how many different items are offered. But again, as a restaurant-style menu, the same menu is offered every day, and they've chosen to use a print format. On the other side of this menu, there's nutrition information, there's information about the department, about how to order, and a lot of other details which are great for patients who are alert and well enough to be able to read that. Many times the patients don't read the small print or aren't able to read the small print, and that's where the catering associate or the dietetic technician or the dietitian becomes involved in helping that. Menus can be presented in many, many different ways. Restaurants, high-end restaurants, tend to bind them in leather or put them in elaborate cases. They can be laminated, like the example of this one that I captured from BJ's. Paper menus are easy to replace and inexpensive. Many restaurants that have websites will post their menu there in addition to in the menu. And of course, menu boards and signs that can be changed easily every day are common also in many locations, not just for their permanent menu, but for specials of the day. And then the spoken menu is what we've learned about in some healthcare systems, where it offers the flexibility and the personalization of the menu, and it's not actually in print. It's delivered by the tech or the catering associate or the diet aide personally to each patient. The pattern of the menu is really an outline of the types of foods that are offered, not necessarily the specific foods themselves. So a pattern might include appetizers, entrees, side dishes, desserts, beverages, and how many of those that would be offered at each meal would be indicative of the pattern. A static menu is a restaurant-style menu is an example of that, where there are multiple items and it's the same every day. The menu at In-N-Out Burger or at McDonald's is a great example of a static menu, or a hospital that adopts a restaurant-style menu that stays the same for a year or two is another example of a static menu. Cycle menus, on the other hand, are a series of menus that vary in length. We've heard about month-long cycle menus in school settings. We've heard about 8-week cycle menus in very long-term care settings, nursing homes, prisons, and places where people live for long periods of time. And the length is generally driven by the average length of stay of the consumer. And then single-use menus are those that are designed again for a specific event. Catering menus for weddings and birthday parties and retirements are great examples of single-use menus, as well as the kind of catering that might take place by any operator, whether they're a school system or a healthcare system or an on-site setting that might plan a special menu for a retirement or something of that nature. The pattern is categorized by the amount of choice that's offered, and that choice is driven usually by the kind of operation that is providing it. And a static menu could have either a few choices in a very limited menu restaurant or even in a healthcare environment, or it might have more choices depending on like the example a few slides back from the Sodexo account. And then a single or a cycle or single-use menu can provide some selections and choices among, may have 2 different entrees, a meatless entree, and one that contains meat, but then may only offer 1 dessert, for example, or maybe only 1 type of soup. In healthcare, you have some rather unique needs, and that's why the focus of this class is directed to the healthcare menu, although many of the principles will apply across the board. There are, of course, special nutritional needs of patients that require modifications for both nutrients and micro and macronutrients in particular, as well as textures and amounts. But in the same organization, you're going to have staff that's healthy and active. You're going to have medical staff that comes and goes. You'll have visitors. You have no idea of what their medical condition is. And then you have the normal seasonal changes that come and changes in cost. And what I mean by high and low cost is that many times high cost items are included on a healthcare menu, like a lamb chop, like fresh asparagus, but they're usually worked in periodically, combined with low cost items like chicken, so that there's both good variety to the menu and also a balance in price. The 3-meal-a-day pattern is the typical structure, and it's actually required in a healthcare environment with specifications as to the number of hours that can't be exceeded between meals. Breakfast is more than just eggs and bacon anymore, and we've put a lot of emphasis on grain products. In spite of some consumers moving away from gluten, there's still a lot of interest in whole grains and even those that contain gluten at breakfast meals. In college and university food service, some of those same trends are exactly those that are in place. We see great interest in sustainable and local foods. There is significant interest in gluten and allergy-free or allergen-free, again, for those with genuine, real allergies, as well as for those that are just interested in eliminating a particular food group from their diet. There's also, apart from the menu, there's great pressure to keep board prices stable, and by board we mean the cost of a meal plan for students who live on campus, because as tuition costs are rising, many parents and young adults are looking for cost-effective alternatives to or educational experiences. And so when room and board prices and campus meal plans are going up, there are actually more and more students that are starting college in community colleges and then moving immediately to their own housing, completely skipping the on-campus experience. So that is having an impact on campus dining experiences. There are more returns to basics to cut costs. For a while, college experiences were becoming more elaborate, more trendy, and they're looking now as ways to meet the needs of the students, but maybe without the really high cost changes that we've seen in some situation. Definitely the opportunity to survey and test acceptance on menu items. This is an example of a survey that I picked from the book that you might want to use when you're working on your own projects to test recipes, but it's a great idea to do these kinds of surveys on specific menu items as well, with small groups of participants. It's not likely you're going to get big numbers. You definitely want to look at all of these different factors: taste and appearance and temperature, and is the serving size just right? So this is another example. And then you can also actually measure plate waste. This is an image from a plate waste study that we did in a school. As you can see by all the different cans and the concentration of the student, it was complicated, it was time consuming, and we were funded by a grant to do this. So but it definitely gives you very concrete measurements on what is actually consumed compared to what is taken. This is a summary of the dietary guidelines that relate to food and to nutrition. There are also factors that should be considered when planning menus, and many of these are actually mandated in school environments and in places where taxpayer dollars are spent on food. And then lastly, the school lunch program is a great example of a very specific menu pattern that is required, that for the reimbursable lunch, and we'll not talk about breakfast yet, but the reimbursable lunch must provide 1/3 of the RDA for the nutrients that are listed here, and the amounts are slightly different once you get above the 5th grade, but the examples for kindergarten through the 5th grade are those that are listed that must be provided every day, and in some instances they're allowed a week to, on average, meet those requirements. There are also subgroup requirements for dark green vegetables, red-orange vegetables, beans and peas, starchy, and other vegetables. So there are some specifics. We'll move on in the next one to more specifics related to healthcare. Thanks so much.